When we picture the American war in Vietnam, the imagery is almost universally grounded in the jungle. We see infantry squads navigating thick brush and heavy combat in a highly publicized, conventional theater of operations. But parallel to the combat broadcast on the evening news, the United States was running a completely different kind of war in the shadows. This secondary campaign operated entirely outside the standard rules of engagement. Bypassing official military channels gave commanders immediate tactical advantages. They could deploy extreme measures and fund proxy forces without having to answer to congressional oversight or the American public. Breaking the rules of conventional warfare secured those short-term gains, but it came with a heavy hidden price tag. The true cost of the conflict was simply deferred to the next generation. The first of these hidden fronts was Operation Ranch Hand. To strip away the jungle canopy, the military sprayed 11 million gallons of a 50-50 herbicide mixture, commonly known as Agent Orange, directly over millions of acres of forests and farmlands. The second front was a covert CIA operation in neighboring Laos. There, the agency funded and trained a heavily armed secret army, commanded by ethnic Hmong General Vang Pao. In 1975, the conventional combat ended. The United States completely withdrew its forces from Southeast Asia and declared its involvement over. But for the civilians living on poisoned soil and the Hmong proxy fighters left to fend for themselves, a completely new nightmare was just getting started. The spraying of Agent Orange was executed with systematic precision. Aircraft flew in tight formations to blanket dense vegetation, intending to starve enemy troops of ground cover and cut off their supply lines. The mixture used 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, creating a deadly byproduct, dioxin. Dioxin takes decades to break down. Being fat-soluble, it bioaccumulates. From wiped-out mangrove forests, toxins seeped into soil and water, multiplying in concentration up the food chain, from crops to livestock to people. The physiological toll was staggering. Thousands of American military veterans developed soft tissue cancers and lymphomas. In Vietnam, exposure to the lingering dioxins resulted in severe malformations and rare birth defects in the children of civilians. Chemical contaminants do not observe ceasefires or sign peace treaties. Long after the spraying aircraft were grounded, the biological damage continued to multiply, passing the trauma down through multiple generations. While the landscape was absorbing toxic chemicals, a human proxy war was absorbing casualties. General Vang Pao commanded thousands of Hmong soldiers in a brutal, entrenched fight against communist forces in Laos, acting on direct orders from the CIA. When the Marxist government seized control of Laos in 1975, the CIA quickly evacuated its own personnel. The Hmong fighters who held the line for American interests were abruptly left behind as a stateless, hunted people holding defensive positions with dwindling supplies. Facing immediate reprisals, tens of thousands of Hmong refugees began a desperate mass exodus. They fled across the border into overcrowded camps in Thailand, hoping to eventually find asylum. The initial American response to this crisis was silence. Acknowledging the refugees meant admitting to an illegal, covert war, and the government actively looked the other way to avoid geopolitical fallout. Like the dioxin sprayed into the soil, the proxy fighters were swept under the rug, abandoned to face the consequences of an American strategy. Accountability for these actions was not freely given. It required decades of relentless activism by veterans and their families to force the government to publicly acknowledge the lethal nature of Agent Orange. An international response eventually followed. Extensive studies mapped out the remaining dioxin hotspots near old supply trails, and the Vietnamese government established designated peace villages to care for the thousands of children born with severe health complications. This area chart illustrates the delayed bureaucratic reckoning in the United States. Beginning in the 1980s and spiking through the 2000s, the Department of Veterans Affairs finally granted presumptions of exposure, issuing monthly compensation to sickened troops and their children. That official recognition only materialized because the victims, both military personnel and civilians, refused to let policymakers ignore the undeniable medical data. General Vang Pao also spent his later years fighting for recognition. Operating out of the United States, he rallied global support to stop the forced repatriation of Hmong refugees back into Laos. His advocacy hit a bizarre twist in 2007 during Operation Tarnished Eagle. The U.S. government abruptly arrested the aging general, accusing him of plotting to overthrow the government of Laos. After immense public backlash and protests from his former soldiers, federal prosecutors quietly dropped all charges. When Vang Pao died in 2011, the tension over his legacy flared one last time. The U.S. Army initially denied requests to bury him at Arlington National Cemetery, trying to keep the secret war entirely off the books. Once again, public pressure intervened. The outcry from veterans organizations and the Hmong American community forced the military to reverse course, officially hosting a national memorial ceremony for him and his fighters at Arlington. Wars are rarely cleanly closed by the signing of a treaty. Deploying toxic defoliants and weaponizing marginalized populations might secure an immediate objective, but those tactics incur a massive generational debt, one that history will eventually force a nation to pay.